Brace
I'm
for
coming.
impact.
Yes.
Now it is for a moment.
And I think we are almost live. Yes, we are. And Dirk disappeared.
Yes, I'm posting. I'm posting. So go
Oh,
We
on
are
without
live.
me.
all right. Okay. Yeah, yeah. We are. But your webcam disappeared, but it will return. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. I also have the chat here on the right. Let me see if I can also see what people are saying. Live chat. Yeah. So this is the live chat. I've got it turned on now. And I think everything is looking a-okay. So I would say let's get this started. For the people who are wondering why Dirk isn't showing, he will be with us very soon, just taking care of a few things. And for tonight's stream, I'd like to introduce to you several of the writers and game designers that helped bring Blood and Doom to life. First of all, I'll start with Dirk, who is not here at the moment, who is a gold medal of culture winner, former regional director for the RPGA. And I met him, I think it was almost a year ago now, actually through marketing. I was looking for someone to help with some marketing on Blood and Doom, and Dirk actually, well, I found out that he also was a very capable writer, and through Dirk coming on the project, I also got to know Jason Walters and Stephen S. Long. And Jason is, among other things, the general manager of Indie Press Revolution. He is also a publisher at Hero Games and publisher at High Rock Press. And gentlemen, please correct me if I'm making any mistakes. And Stephen S. Long has written and co-written over 200 role-playing game books and has won most of the tabletop industry's major awards. I think among which any awards, right? Or at least one or
Yes,
several?
I've won some Emmy awards,
Yeah.
though that's a little odd because it has to do with the way the rules used to be versus the way the awards are organized now.
Ah, I see.
It's kind of an odd thing, but I've over the years won several silver and gold Emmys. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And then there's me, and I was just before the stream started joking to everyone what I could say. And I'm also a writer. But then, you know, the guys very pleasantly pointed out to me, you know, as someone new to doing this, you know, I have taken it upon me to put together this project, create it, you know, envision from the start what it's going to be, doing some writing, doing some designing, of course, and managing the entire project, getting it together. So doing all sorts of things, art direction on Blood and Doom to where it is today. So I don't know if Dirk is already done and maybe could join us. I don't think
I'll join you in about a minute.
in a bit. Okay. It seems so strange. Okay, so join us in about a minute, and then I think we could go over some things that I think people would be interested to learn about Blood and Doom. First of all, for those watching, I'll also be running a stream where I'll be playing or I'll be GMing a game of Blood and Doom this weekend. So also keep your eye out for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of people have been asking for it. But of course, I thought it would also be very cool to do this conversation with our writers. So actually, Jason, I think you after Dirk joined the project, it was you and Darren, who is sadly no longer with us, that first joined as writers, because some artists, I have to say, especially I want to mention Mark Graham, should he be watching. He is actually the first person ever to join the project, and he has done some amazing art throughout the book, which you can see on the covers, inside the book, everywhere. But aside from Dirk as on the writing part of the game, the design, I still remember very fondly our first conversations and really looking at what was there at the time. And maybe you could share with us a little bit about what your initial thoughts were, how Dirk got to approaching you, and because I still remember that at that time the game looked a little bit different than it does now, because you had some very good ideas about especially making it more unique than it was at that time.
I think one of our first ideas, and again, you know, we spent some weeks just sort of throwing ideas back and forth regularly, was that the planet that Blood and Doom was going to take place on would be the last surviving planet in the universe.
Yes, yeah, I remember.
That the Elder Gods had basically wiped out everything, and that it was the last stand for living things, and that of course eventually their doom would come, and then that would be the end of all things, and it would be the point of the characters to struggle against their inexorable and horrible fate.
Yeah,
that was a little dark.
It was, yeah. I suggested that there should be at least a little bit of hope, you know, for characters, but I do think this idea still stuck to the game. Maybe like toned down a little bit. It's like Aether is one of several remaining worlds out there, but it's definitely not looking good. And many worlds have already perished. But yeah, I think we were, especially now that I think back, we were looking to really put the blood and the doom into the game, where before this it was its own, it had its own unique rule set, and it had like somewhat of the world building was established already, but it didn't really have, I think, enough blood and doom for your taste, and to really honor the name of the game more, I think.
Well, I think one of the things that struck me when I remember reading your and Dirk's initial monsters that you created for the game was here he is.
He's back, yeah.
I'm back.
Was
Man himself.
how not only wonderfully disturbing and weird they were, but that they were very like they had motivations and moral ambiguity. I remember reading the first 2 or 3 monster entries, and that impressed me a lot. Like the monsters were definitely not retreads of Dungeons and Dragons and monsters. They had very strange motivations and very strange kind of backstories as a species. That made a big impression on me right off the bat when you guys showed me the initial material.
I think Dirk wrote most of those at that point. Like I think it was the story for the Skeleton Warrior and the story for the Togwa and the Munagi.
I was particularly impressed with the Skeleton Warrior write-up when I first started doing the monsters.
Yeah,
I thought it was very evocative.
Which is interesting because it's not yet in the primers, so the people watching are still like, oh, okay, well, just something that you can still
something to look forward to.
Something to look forward to for when the actual books will be coming out. So
now, are the quick start rules currently available, Dirk or Ferruccio?
Yeah,
yes,
the primer
they're available like through Drive-Thru RPG.
People can download the primer bundle, which is more than 500 pages of free stuff.
Yeah,
3 books.
It actually has an amazingly high amount of reviews already, like 34 or 35 as of today, and
That's
it has
impressive.
and an average of 4.7 stars out of 5, I think, and many people commenting and writing some nice reviews. So yeah, I have to say, from all the people who downloaded it, most of the reactions have been, very positive so
Good.
far. Yeah.
If I can tell you a little bit about that monster write-up.
Yeah.
When we started doing the monsters, Ferruccio already had a really nice mix of classical monsters, classic adversaries, something that you would find in any tabletop role-playing game that's based in a fantasy setting, and some really unique monsters. And he just asked me, "Hey, did you come up with some lore?" And he told me at first, these classical monsters, everyone knows them, so you can keep those a little shorter." And I didn't.
Yes.
So, and we went back and forth on that, and then we finally decided on, no, these should also get a lot of lore and make them unique and make them a little different than what everyone already knows from other games. I think that adds a lot to the atmosphere.
Yeah, true. Could you let me see, because my train of thought was when we were adding the blood and the doom. I also remember us talking about because I don't think there were blood points and then something else. So we made it into blood points and doom points, and also made sure that the entire premise of the game would actually emphasize more how there just isn't a lot of hope, So it takes great heroes, or maybe heroes in the making would be a better word, to take on this challenge and to see things go so wrong. And of course, the cults then also, I think, for the first time entered into the settings discussion. I think maybe Dirk, you can talk a little bit about the idea behind that. I still remember, I think in one of the older editions of Blood and Doom, it didn't have the cults yet, like not as specified, and I think we were looking for something, and we then ended up with, okay, what if there are 12 major cults, like they're like the pillars of doom. These 12 are like together will form this sort of structure, like in a manner of speaking, that will bring about this doom to a tier. That sounds, it makes it more clear to the reader, like what is this game actually about.
Yeah, I think that was something that when we were talking about that during the writers' meetings, with Darren Watts still present, and he luckily was still alive at the time, and again, he was a tremendous loss to the team, but also to humanity, because he was an amazing person. And one of the things that we were really adamant about was to make sure that we would have a mechanic that would reflect this really dark genre, and that would reflect that great title, Blood and Doom. And I think we can now see all of these YouTubers talk about the title and how they think the title is really spot on. And we thought that having something in place in the rules that would work narratively, but also mechanically to reinforce that would be really important. And from that point on, we also started talking about the cults, which at that point were already there. You already had cults in your game, but we just decided to flesh them out more and to give them more body and to actually tell people what each of the cults wants to do, what their creed is, what their beliefs are, what extra dimensional entity they worship. And that became an entire book in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, eventually. One of three.
Eventually.
Yeah.
One of three, yes.
And
4 books. There's lots more coming.
Yes, and I remember Darren saying it's like operatic. It's operatic, right? It's like it's not, because I do want to make it clear that this game is not like it's not necessarily gritty and gory for the sake of being like that. It's about grand stories that span. It's epic in a sense, but very dark at the same time.
I always from when I
Oh,
came
sure.
into it, I always felt it kind of had a sword and sorcery aesthetic to it
Yeah.
with this epic backdrop. Normally, you don't have epic stakes and goals in a swords and sorcery story. You're just trying to get out with the loot, save the girl, keep
Yeah.
the bad guy from eating your country. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
in Blood and Doom, you've got these bigger stories playing out over the face of the world. So the characters, even if they start out initially focused on a small part of the world or their own specific concerns, will eventually have to confront this much larger menace and take on duties and responsibilities that they might otherwise run away from. So I kind of like that feel of it.
Yeah.
How the
I
heroes
think
would
that
grow
was
into things.
Yeah, I think it was also tough to really define the genre because it does have that sword and sorcery aesthetic. But Ferruccio was also telling us, and he was really adamant on that, it isn't high fantasy, but it's high action. There are
High
no
adventure.
elves,
High
It's
adventure.
definitely not
High
a high
adventure,
fantasy
high
Yeah.
adventure.
setting, but
Yeah.
it does
Yeah.
have a lot of action. That is true.
Yes. So he
It's-
was trying to make clear from the beginning that there would be no elves, no dwarves, or whatsoever, and certainly not from a player's point of view because
Yeah.
you only play humans. There's multiple origins you can play. There's lots of differences between human cultures and the way they I guess determine their background.
Yeah.
But it's not high fantasy in the sense that there are no non-human races. But Ferruccio was really keen on having it be a high adventure game, which he meant would entail like I guess epic stories, grand storylines, but also smaller ones because it can go any direction you want to in that sense. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of room for these grand epic adventures that can change the world. While you also can have these very small, I guess. I wouldn't even call them quests, but things that happen around you that are on a smaller scale and still have those personal stakes and still feel important enough to really invest in.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I mean I love sword and sorcery, but I also like my magic, and I don't know. I think there's a middle ground there, that I find very appealing.
Well,
And I think
yeah.
especially the world, there is just this magical essence in the world of Aether. You know, there's these floating stones, and there's these like deep crevices in the earth that like maybe, I mean, we're not sure, but there are rumors that those may lead into other realms. And I don't think that's something you see in a typical sword and sorcery story, but on many other fronts, it does feel like, because it's very boots on the ground, a kind of adventuring feel, without doing away with like all the magic, and at the same time not giving your players anything like I don't know, a wish spell, or just being able to create food and fire and light whenever they please, as in some other games where some things just don't feel like they matter enough in those games. And from the early playtesting that we did, I just really love how it's just very important that you bring some torches into a dungeon, right? And it's very important that you don't lose them, because if you do, you're out there in the dark and there's monsters everywhere. And I feel in that sense it's definitely more a sword and sorcery from a game mechanical perspective than that's what I'm talking about. But
I think that's why so many people like the fact that there's no dark vision in the game, because so many players are used to having dark vision.
yeah,
And in the end, you kind of lose the sense of foreboding and the sense of it doesn't matter if a dungeon is dark and damp, if everyone can see into darkness.
well, I would also dare and say live on this stream that I think dark vision in D&D must also be one of the most hated, contested things that's out. I think when even fans of the game, they're like, you know, it doesn't seem to really matter that we're going into dark places, because I think 90% of all the ancestries can basically just see in the dark. So,
And even the ones who can't have access to, continual light or continual flame spells and other ways to provide themselves with light. And, I understand the rationale, because bookkeeping and tracking individual torches and supplies and things isn't fun for many people, but it does create a different feel than the feel you get from a high fantasy game like Dungeons and Dragons, where magic is very common, multiple races, and powerful as well as common.
Yeah.
And Blood and Doom specifically hews away from that.
Jason?
Wouldn't you say that Blood and Doom works a bit harder to insert a moral tone into Swords and Sorcery than is common for the genre, because you have these cults that in the long term you have to oppose to prevent the end of the world. And that gives you stakes that are often lacking from, I don't know, like if you go read the old Thieves' World stories, that's very Swords and Sorcery. You go and read Elric, Eternal Champion, even going back to Howard's, Conan the Barbarian stuff. It tends to be kind of amoral, whereas this tends to inject that in there, that there's big things going on and you have important ethical decisions to make and things to do.
Well, I would argue not so much. I mean, I think it is subtle, but I think there is a moral tone in most Swords and Sorcery, certainly the best Swords and Sorcery. But one of the things that Blood and Doom is very good at is sort of bringing that front and center. Even if the player characters don't realize it right away, because all they're concerned about is these strange looking beasts that have been raiding the fields and are going to, lead to everybody starving this winter if we don't stop them. That eventually turns into realizing that there's this threat not just to our village, but to the world. And we're the ones chosen by fate or dumb luck to deal with it. And so I like the fact that moral aspect that Jason mentioned is right in, sort of baked in.
Yeah, and actually one of the
world design.
One of the backers mentioned exactly what Jason was saying. It's like, so I was reading about the premise of the game, and it seems like you're expected to be some kind of a force for good in this game, right? Mm-hmm. You're not expected to be stealing and robbing. And, you can do it any way you like. You can be this sort of Han Solo type character, thinking only about themselves, maybe even betraying people. Whatever you have to do, steal, rob, for all I care. But I think your intentions, in the end, should be noble in some way, because you're all in the same boat together, and if no one is going to save the world, then what will you end up gaining?
It's generally not fun to play a character who's just self-interested and amoral. That's dull. You encounter too much of that in real life.
Yeah.
But true. I would also say one thing that I thought was really important was not to do good via evil, because evil's been done to death and it doesn't feel real, I guess, in a sense, because it's too one-dimensional. So when we were talking about motivations, it was very obvious to us that the extra-dimensional entities, the Heralds of Doom, their motivations can kind of look like human motivations, but they aren't really. So they're almost unknowable, but still a little bit understandable to still be able to get that attachment. Whereas a lot of the cults aren't necessarily evil, but misinformed or misguided. Yes. And the end result can be an evil thing. And I think that's something that I learned as an acting coach as well. Instead of choosing your emotion as an actor and choosing the emotion of the character, which kind of gets you stuck in a certain place and inflexible, you're guided by the context.
I think this is interesting, what you mentioned. Because remember, Dirk, that I said to you, I think all the cults should have two things, which is one, what they think will happen by worshipping this Herald of Doom, and what will actually happen, right? It's very important, because who in the right
It's always worse than what they think they will happen.
Of course,
What will happen is always
who
worse
in
than
their
they think
right
will
mind would worship an entity that will bring them eternal suffering? No one, But they think, oh, it will be a transcendental experience. We will be harmonious, and everyone will be. To name just one example, it will lift humankind to like a higher state of being. But they are all of them deceived, to quote from the Lord of the Rings, and of course, it doesn't turn out that way. And I think it's very interesting that these Ayari, which is how everything started, and that actually was added also later into the lore of the game, that their warnings, which I find intensely interesting because it's so real in a sense. Their warnings are thousands of years old. Now you give those warnings from an alien race about alien godlike entities a few thousands of years to brew, and people will start making different assumptions, different translations. They will translate immense evil into like omnipotence and to like godly divine power, and all of a sudden you have these people who, for better or worse, think that they are worshipping something that is coming to maybe do something great and benevolent, but that's just it's so old, nobody knows, and it just got of course there's people who realize that it actually is bad news. But I think that's immensely interesting. This, the cults are not necessarily trying to do something evil. Their methods and the ways they try to achieve it are very dubious, to say the least.
I was
and of
really
course,
impressed.
most of them are insane. Most of them are insane.
Yeah, but they have become insane. They're actually also victims in a way of the. Sorry, Stephen.
I was going to say, I was really impressed. In writing up the monsters for the quick start rules, which was my main contribution to the project, I had to read over 2 or 3 or 4 of the cult descriptions, and I was really impressed at how each cult was undeniably doing things that you could label as evil, or in a more neutral sense, that the player characters are going to want to stop because it's not good for the world or their portion of the world.
Yeah.
But yet each one was different and distinct, had a very specific way of looking at the world that was not the same as the others, had points of both agreement and difference with the other cults. And each one really felt like a living religion, much more so than just a generic, okay, these are bad guys. They want to worship this evil demon prince who they think will give them power.
Yeah.
It's the ones I read, at least, were never anything close to that simple, except on the very surface level. There was always a lot more going on, and that not only made it fun to write up some of the monsters and creatures that was associated or were associated with these cults, but just to think about the possibilities from a campaign design sense.
Yeah, I like this initiate, because the initiate, you see the different cult stat blocks that Stephen designed, and the initiate is still very eager to move up the ladder, and they have this like fanatical assault where they just stab you 6 times in a row because they are still hungry for more. Like unlike those of higher rank within the cult who have all kinds of magical abilities and leadership skills, this initiate is just very like, I will sacrifice myself.
He's very gung-ho.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to eventually someday there will be a supplement detailing all of these cults, or 4 supplements detailing 3 cults each, or whatever it turns out to be. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the greater level of detail that you and Dirk and whoever cooks up.
Well, the 12 Pillars of Doom
campaign.
It's all of them. The 12 Pillars of Doom is going to include all
because
of the
since you guys joined, it's the books. We started with 1 book, 2 books. It's now 3 books, and the 12 Pillars of Doom will have all 12 cults eventually in them. So there's a lot more to work to do. I wanted to segue into something because Stephen mentioned working on his stat blocks, and I remember both you and also Jason Dural asking me a lot of questions relating to the game being player facing, which is something I found very interesting. Could you maybe say something about what it was like to find out that this game was a player facing game and how to apply this to the step? Because from the talks that we had and the email conversations as well.
Yeah, a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I took it that what I took for like already, because the game has been player facing since its the first day that I started writing. But I did notice that for some people joining later, that wasn't automatically like a given. Like, what does he or she roll? I'm like, no, the Doomsayer doesn't roll anything, right? It's just so. What do you think about
it was an intriguing design decision. It was not one I had worked with previously, and so naturally I had a lot of questions because I, as someone you've hired to work for you, want to give you material that satisfies your desire and fits with your vision. So that meant asking a lot of questions, and it requires a certain shift in the way you look at things, and thus in some cases the way you design things, because for example, as I pointed out to you, it seemed to me that because the player is not only rolling to hit the other person, he's also rolling to avoid the monster's attacks.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, that doesn't seem fair. Basically, you're saying the monster automatically hits every time.
Yeah, I remember.
You're like, no.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Back and forth with all of that.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it changes the focus of play in an interesting way. And it, frankly, I haven't run the game yet myself because I never had the entire finished book.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways it would make the game master's job, the Doomsayer's job, easier.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to worry about rolling things. He has to worry more about saying, okay, this is happening, you do this. So I think it frees him up a little bit, him or her, to go with the story a little bit more and not worry, quite so much about some rules things that might slow you down in other games, including many games I've written and worked on. So it's an interesting change of focus to me.
Yeah.
And that led to a lot of questions because I'm eternally curious about basically everything.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to help guide
we sent
you
some
through the process.
long emails back and forth.
Yeah, and then things really started to click eventually. And I think it's interesting because for me, once I played my first player-facing game, and it was either Numenera or Powered by the Apocalypse game, but I was like, this is how all games should be. Because I feel I always get a headache at the end of the evening when I'm the game master, because I have to keep track of initiative. There's like, I don't know, 12 orcs here, and I have to roll, and I have to do this and that. And now I was just sitting there and I was saying I felt more like a movie director. I could say like, this is what's happening, describing it, making it narrative, making it into a story, thinking about all the cool things. And I would just have to say them out loud and not worry about, all kinds of things that I would need to do in order to make that happen. No, instead, the players were having a ton of fun reacting to this, rolling to defend, rolling to resist this or to do that. And I just thought that was really, like you say, freeing up like mind space and making it a little bit more relaxed and fun for the game master, or the Doomsayer, we should say. So that was
Doomsaying
really
or game mastering it's a job. As fun as it might be, it still requires effort, and
anything that can help.
A lot of us get older, the ways to minimize the effort are often very welcome.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the intent. And but at the same time, it's not just that, right? It's also that the players seem more engaged because, it's not my turn anymore. But you cannot sit back and go and check your phone. because 2 seconds from that moment, the Doomsayer might say, this or that monster is attacking you. Now a roll to defend. So there's no, even when it's not your turn as a player, you are always expected to be alert and maybe to react to stuff, and that makes it just much more engaging. And there's a story building, and if you combine that with the lack of a set initiative order, players are also more engaged because they are looking for a moment of opportunity for them to step in, which could be any time, right? It's not like, oh, I have to wait before he and her have taken this. No, it's like, I don't know yet when I will take my turn, but there will be an opportune moment, or something will happen that will make me so angry that I just will jump in, protect my friend, save my ally, because I've had it with this beastman or whatever monster they're fighting, and it creates like real situations. Like, people do things, players do things because they really feel like they need to or want to do them, and not because it's their turn. So
I think process as well, the rules, by providing a lot of different character attributes, give players multiple approaches to dealing with many problems. And even though, like, the monster stat blocks will say, okay, roll toughness or take this damage, a player could say, well, wait a minute, from the sound of that attack, the way you're describing it, I think I could resist that using courage or heart, and make a good case, and then roll that and change his approach and maybe your approach to the entire encounter by looking at it through different eyes, even if the ultimate intent of the different look is to get a benefit or an advantage. That doesn't mean it's bad for the story.
No, definitely.
And I think Blood and Doom offers a lot of possibilities there to, sort of freeform things or freestyle things, rather than depending on a specific chain of rules. This.
Yeah, and there's the set difficulty, because the actions have like individual difficulties, but there's also this base difficulty listed on the top, like really large at the top, like anything that the players will do to interact with this creature, whether to like scare them, to try and befriend them, to like cast magic on them, whatever they want to do, attack them, it's that difficulty. Unless like the creature is taking one of their actions, and it sometimes has like a higher difficulty or something else.
Or he has a special trait or ability. It was fun designing the monsters, coming up with also different ways for them to use different attributes. Not every attack has to involve toughness. And it was it was intriguing to try to think of, okay, what can I do with this monster that involves one of the spiritual attributes, that kind of thing.
And the final thing I'd like to say about the stat blocks, because we can move on then, is that it's very interesting that every monster specifically has a minimum of 4 unique actions and an average of 6 from 6 to 8, I think. So it's between like 4 and 8 actions. And that just gives a greater variety. They're hard. It's hard because you have to think up, because it cannot be like, oh, it's like the same thing but a little bit different. They're all quite unique and very different from one another. And you can then roll a d10 to determine if you want. You don't have to. But I would definitely
recommend. They're suggestions. They're not rigid rules.
You roll to randomly determine what they'll do, and that's so much fun. And
coming up with ways to, give the monster sometimes took a lot of effort. I'd be sitting here thinking,
what could it be?
Doing nothing but thinking for 15 minutes, trying to figure out a way, how can I make this normally one-dimensional monster, more three-dimensional? Because sometimes it's rough. Some monsters are more or less meant to be one-dimensional.
Yeah, that's true.
But we wanted to get around that.
Claw attack or a bite attack, and that's it. But you still need to have some. I loved the Gout of Hellfire. Oh my God! We were laughing so hard with my friends. I was playtesting, and I'm rolling. And you know what's fun about rolling is that I don't even know what's going to happen. So I'm just enjoying myself so much as the Doomsayer, and I'm like, oh my god, it's a gout of hellfire, and my players are like, oh my god, what's that gonna be? And I'm like, we'll see, and I'll read them what happens. And one of the players just kept burning for 3 rounds in a row, and it was horrible because it's easy to get rid of the burning, but they just failed their rolls horribly, and we were laughing. So the gout of hellfire is a good example.
Yeah, and then that became a joke when I was writing up the environment rules later on in the process. Well, you got to have hellfire in there
because nothing burns hotter than hellfire, which you said in the description. Because that's also part of the fun, is making those narrative descriptions in the monster stat blocks. I mean, they're not all jokes by any means, but sometimes there's this little tongue-in-cheek thing, like, it like hellfire, it burns hotter than any fires. Like, why would a Doomsayer? It adds nothing to the mechanical effect of this action, but it's so much fun to have that knowledge and
absolutely.
I think one thing I want to stress also is that a lot of games force you to play the game in a certain way, and one thing I like about Blood and Doom and one thing I like about some games that are amongst my favorites is that they allow you to play it in different ways. For example, there's a reason why we're not talking about random encounter tables. We're talking about quest hooks or tables with possibilities, and you can roll on them. But the operative word is that you can roll. You don't have to. You can also pick and choose.
Yeah.
And the same goes
with the monsters.
For example. Exactly. So if you want to roll randomly and you think that's fun, and you want to surprise yourself by rolling randomly, you definitely can do that, which you can't in almost any other game. But they can also serve just as inspiration for the Doomsayer, who can use those actions that are already described to come up with his own or her own interpretations, for their own interpretations for certain actions or for monsters. And that, I think, is one of the strengths of the system. That, okay, listen, if you want to do it this way, or you don't have the necessary inspiration to come up with a unique action at the moment, or to describe the action in an evocative way, you can just roll for it, and there will be an evocative description for the action in the stat block. But if you want to do it differently, you can do that as well. And I think that adds a lot to the game, because the thing you want to avoid is just roll dice and say, okay, you get 5 damage, you get 6 damage, etc., etc. To me, that always felt like it hurts suspension of disbelief and it hurts immersion. And in the end, when your weapon does nothing else than just deal damage, and you've been in combat for a long time, even the best of game masters, or Doomsayers in our case, will eventually sometimes end up saying, okay, you get 6 damage. And certainly some of the players will. And you can definitely do that in Blood and Doom as well. But if you want to increase immersion a little bit, if you want to describe the action a little bit more, if you want to be more narrative in that way, then you can do that, and we give you the tools to do that. And one thing I saw creeping up in some of the comments of some of the players who were already backing Blood and Doom, or people who were thinking of maybe backing Blood and Doom, was a concern that we force people to play it in a certain way, because they're used to narrative games, kind of tying their narrative to a mechanic. And that's definitely not what we're doing. We're not saying, okay, if you spend this amount of points, then you can take control of the narrative, and as a player, you can tell the other players what's happening, instead of the Doomsayer or the Game Master doing that. That's not what this game is about. We're just making sure that if you want to include some more immersion, if you want to include some more description, that you already have that in front of you.
Yeah. And a lot of openness, right? So, like what you mentioned, the rules are largely described in a way where they are well defined, but at the same time, they don't give you that feeling that they tell you exactly point by point what needs to happen when this happens or when that happens. Because when you start doing that, it kind of takes away the freedom of the doomsayer to kind of run with it. So there's a lot, for example, the tools that are being offered, like the item use roll, the reposition roll, and the initiative roll, which, by the way, is not the kind of initiative roll that you may think it is, because there's no set initiative order. But those are like special rolls that can be made during the game to have certain decisions be made, to see where things may end up. Same thing with the Doom roll. Those are intended, the game is very open, and in case there's like any chance that you're unsure of what might happen, in many cases an item use roll, a reposition roll, or an initiative. For example, when you have a system that has an open initiative where anyone can take a turn at any time, you know, I've not had it happen at my table, but I can imagine at some point in time there will be a moment when a player says, I want to do this, and the doomsayer is like, okay, but you know, all four players have now taken a turn. I want to have this monster act now. And the player will say, no, I really... And then there will be this debate. And then you can just simply ask the player, okay, now make an initiative roll. And then if they make it, they get to take their turn. And if they don't, then the doomsayer gets to have the monster. So it's like a tiebreaker. And those little handy tools, like item use, reposition, a doom roll, those are the things that you can then use to solve such issues quickly, should they ever arise. So again, like, I've not had it happen at my table, but sometimes usually you have this flow, like action, reaction, but sometimes maybe, when 3 players insist on taking a turn in one after another, and you're like, yeah, but I've got 6 monsters here. I think it's, fair to assume at least one of them is going to do something now. Yeah, you can use that initiative roll. So I wanted to segue into talking a little bit more about the world, because I'm looking at the screen now and I kind of see Athenia and Ishta also. And I see Dirk and I see Jason. And I wanted to talk because you have kind of taken the lead, either one of you of these 2 regions. I just wanted to know, and I'll start with Jason. What were your initial impressions of the world? I'm sure you took a look at the Tenia as well, but probably much more into the early concept of Ishta and what that was all about. And I remember you initially writing this really interesting character from the islands of Roshan, who is somewhere safe on my hard drive, and I want to do something with this. And this character was traveling throughout Ishta and discovering it. And I found it so interesting because Dirk works in an entirely different way, as do I, and you decided to inhabit this character through which you would view this world, or should I say continent, or like, region of the world, to really, get into it, immerse yourself in it, to get inspiration. So can you tell us a bit more about why do you do it this way, and how does that work for you?
Well, so one of my writing techniques is to try to visualize, to try to channel a non-existent place, to try to put myself into it and bring it not into existence, but to bring it out through me. And my original idea was that Ishta would be kind of like that. I'd be focused on something like a cross between Prescott's Prescott's conquest of Mexico and Ed Greenwood's Volo's Guide to the Dale Ants, or something like that. I was kind of going to bring a travel log out through me. And that's what kind of came out naturally. I also had recently been kind of exploring some of the British new wave fantasy writers in the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, boy, here's my chance to do that too, right? To do something like a Moorcock novel. And so I just tried to reach out into that other place where, you know, magical worlds exist and channel it, bring it in and let it come out. And my protagonist, as he sort of travels through Ishta and just describes all the cultures, peoples, and places he's seeing, was kind of a giant writer's tool to do it all first in first person and just bring it out. And, you know, as you know from editing the final version of the chapter, some of it worked and some of it didn't work as well. There was also the fun of sort of doing a kind of Heart of Darkness kind of routine as he goes deeper and deeper into the jungles, down the river, and uncovers the sort of politics and mysteries of what's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, I still think Hexalta is such. It may be my favorite city, and I think just the main difference was that in your version it was like run by undead, and now I think there's like more of a secret. It's about to happen, like maybe in the future, because I think there's some necromancy going on. Which could be interesting for maybe like in a future supplement or whatever, to see how that evolves, or maybe even I think an entire adventure could be based around like an outbreak of undead in this region or around this city due to this fact. And then there's still the wandering lawmen, right, who are patrolling this area.
Yes.
And the thing is, what I find interesting is, and also as we are now setting up the 7 Jewels of Azura adventure, is that sometimes it is important to take on this perspective of a traveler, because let's say you were born and raised in Ishta, you know, it may feel less mystical to you. But for the Jewels of Azura, we are really going to try and have the player characters not be from Ishta. It's like one of the prerequisites to play this, because they will find a treasure map and travel by ship to Kintaba and go inland on this expedition into Ishta. Look, like your character from the islands of Roshan. And I think sometimes you need to have this, especially in a world that has so many different regions. It can be a lot of fun if players choose to be from one specific place, maybe 2 regions or 1 region, and kind of have sort of similar backgrounds. Because if you choose, and it also says so in the core rulebook, if you because sometimes players tend to want to do this, right? But these are not like fantasy ancestries or races. It's not like, oh, I want to be an elf and then I'll be a dwarf and then you'll be a gnome and I'll be a human. No, it's better if you come from the same place, because then you'll have the same kind of feeling when you are going out into other places of the world and discovering those for the first time. And in another adventure or another campaign, maybe all players' characters are from another region, and then it will feel, you know, like an exploration to go to the other continent as well. And Dirk, Athenia, place of how many words for sand did they have? I think it's like 600.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you know, that's how you borrow from real world cultures. It's by not imitating them, but looking at how cultures function. I think if you start imitating or borrowing, then you're at risk, right? You're at risk of maybe not respecting a culture well enough or not understanding it well enough. But when you have an entirely new, unique fantasy culture, other cultures that already exist, if you analyze them, sometimes you find these really neat ideas. You can extrapolate on how do it work in a fantasy setting, or in an entirely new world.
How do things come into being, right? That's the main question. Why are they like this? Yeah.
Exactly, and if you know about some of the cultures we have on Earth, There are some cultures that have dozens of words for the wind or for grass or whatever, right? So when you know that, you can extrapolate that to an entirely different thing. And it becomes very respectful of, I guess, the source you're borrowing the idea from, but still very distinct and different.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what you're always looking for in a fantasy game, where you're coming up with cultures that may look a little bit like something that you might know from Earth, but are still very much your own thing. And I think that unless you're from that culture yourself and you've lived in it, or you've lived there for multiple years, which you have to do as an anthropologist, then if you don't do that and you try to imitate a culture, it's always going to be wrong. There's always going to be something off. And in a fantasy game, you have that freedom, you have that richness of creativity, and you're not at risk of maybe disrespecting another culture by trying to imitate it. And that's one of the things that you were able to do with Vania and those many different words for sand, because that idea is from the real world, but it has nothing to do with any culture that's from the real world.
Yeah, but
in a direct sense.
You need some sense of it being based on something that's realistic, because otherwise it gets that more high fantasy feel, and I feel disconnected, because it's the same as with playing I don't know, like a turtle person or a cat creature or whatever they have these days. Sure, you can do it, but it's hard to kind of relate to that, right? And I think that kind of distance, just play a human that's from this place or that place, makes it easier for me to embody this character. And in the same way, I think if there's some aspects to these regions and to these cultures that you can think, oh, that kind of makes sense, I understand why it's this way, it makes it just feel more real, and that's what I like. And I think that's and I think that's also why I like Call of Cthulhu so much, and I really want to mention that, because it plays out in our world, right? It's real, and the stakes just feel higher. I don't know what it is, but whenever I play D&D and then Call of Cthulhu, and when something happens in Call of Cthulhu, for example, that's really heavy, and all players, they really feel it, because it's, I don't know, because you're not a cartoony character, you're an actual human from New York or from London or like Cairo, or Sydney, I'm talking about Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is an amazing campaign, and it just I don't know what it is. It just makes it feel, and it's an amazing feeling, because it feels it feels scarier, it feels more tense, and that's the kind of effect that it has, I think.
It has been said by game designers wiser than I that Call of Cthulhu is one of the only truly moral role-playing games, because you have to save the world. You can't tell anyone you're doing it, and your only reward is that you're killed or go insane.
Yeah, and it's true. You cannot tell anyone, because they won't believe you anyway, right? And they'll lock you up, probably. Yeah.
Speaking of realistic things we can all relate to, I unfortunately have another appointment. So I'm going to take my leave of you all. Wish you and the viewers well, and wish you all a good evening.
Yeah.
It has been a pleasure and an honor, and I'm glad everybody watching this, that you're enthusiastic about this project and that you've supported it. Thank you.
Thank you also.
Great to talk to you, Jason. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. We have a lot more writing to do, so.
Yes, we do. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
I think we have time for a few more questions.
Yeah, I want to see, because I noticed a few people watching, but I don't. Or you want to do some like viewer questions? I just want to throw it out there. There's not like hundreds of people watching. I think only a handful of viewers I'm seeing here. If you have any questions, again, this is my first live stream, so maybe I'm not doing it right. But if you have any questions... Oh, see, there's someone who has a question. All right, so Gamehead has a question. go right ahead and enter it into the chat, and we will try and answer it as quickly and as correctly as possible. And Dirk, you had something else that you wanted to talk about in the meantime, or?
I can keep talking about Blood and Doom for a few more days.
I see already that there's a question coming in. I just clicked because it was in what the hell even is this? Okay, that's a good question. It's Blood and Doom. It's a tabletop role-playing game. A dark fantasy tabletop role-playing game is what this is. And, this person got this in the recommended list for some reason, and he's laughing, and he says, he or she says, they love us. It sounds cool and sick, so at least
we are very sick.
Yeah, we are very. Yeah.
There's no question about that.
There's no question about that. Yeah. So I guess there's like a ton of more topics that we can touch upon. I don't think we should go on for like another full hour. Maybe we can add like 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30.
You got to leave them wanting more, as they say.
Exactly. You know, we can do
schedule another chat for closer to the end of the project.
Yeah, because obviously we're doing this live, but this is gonna stay up on YouTube, and
true.
We have to make sure that we don't inundate people with too much information as well. But still, I think we should definitely talk on a few or touch on a few more topics before we leave.
Yeah.
One of the things, obviously, is the Kickstarter itself, because while we're taping this, we're still having the Kickstarter. It's still going on. We have, I guess, a little less than 10 days to go. We got fully funded within a day, but we do want to get to a few more stretch goals in order to get our backers even more fun stuff.
The priest class, they really want the priest class. Everybody wants the priest class. And what's the next one? It's the Roll20 package. And after the priest class, it gets even more interesting, because there'll be more miniature models of the cults, and eventually we're working our way up to the soundtrack and even a supplement book about factions. So yeah, so go ahead, Dirk. Sorry, but I just wanted to say what these because especially the priest class, so many backers are like, oh, we really need to get up to that stretch goal to get the priest class, because they'll and you and I also really want this to happen, because we both feel like it would be a good addition to the game, right?
I think all of our writers want to delve into religion and what priests are all about, and the different kinds of priests, because there's a priest class, but it represents a lot of different kind of priests as well. It's not just like the cleric, right? So it's definitely something that I think will enrich the game, because there are quite a lot of priests in the setting. I think we're gonna do something very unique with it as well, because it's a lot more open than what most people are used to.
Yeah.
If they play like OSR games or D&D, then I think the priest class is definitely a more open class, which can be more different things, because you can pick and choose different skills and different feats and traits, etc., to different magic.
Yeah.
And they may not be as defined by the god or spirit, because some of the priests actually worship spirits instead of gods.
Mm-hmm.
But it still is very much a thing, and some priests actually worship multiple gods, which was also the case in real life in so many different religions.
Yeah.
So
there are many approaches to religion and myth.
Thank you, Gamehead. Thank you. I'm just interrupting you for small. Gamehead is congratulating us on the funding, and he or she is also a game dev. Oh, asking about skills and class. It's ability and skill. D10 dice pool. D10 dice pool. But continue, yeah, please. So, about the Kickstarter and the things that we want to unlock.
One more thing about the priest class. The reason why we didn't do a priest class in the core rulebook is because, or not yet until that stretch goal is unlocked, is because we thought that unless you do it right, and unless you also include all of these different gods and the different approaches to religion, then it doesn't feel, I guess, like it's very immersive, or it doesn't feel like it's real, I guess, in a sense. It doesn't suspend disbelief, and we wanted to give the priest the attention, the love, and the number of pages the class deserves. So that's one thing. As far as the other stretch goals are concerned, I think if you go and look at the Kickstarter page, then you'll see a lot of stuff that we have coming up. And after the game is done and we get it released, then we have so much more stuff to do and so many more supplements to write. But I think if we can get to some of those stretch goals, then our backers are going to get something that's even bigger of a package than we're already handing out, which is already a lot. And it's going to be a very, very, very fully fleshed out game with so many different options. And like Ferruccio, for example, said,
I think
the Roll20 integration is certainly very important to a lot of players who weren't able to play with their friends at the table sometimes and who need to play this digitally, or who want digital support and who want to have their character sheets up.
And
if you just go look at Roll20 now, the character sheet looks amazing.
I'm just a sucker for the icons. I want all 77 gods to have the artworks. Anyway, Stephen, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I think one of the things that really impressed me the more I worked on the game, since, as you know, I came into the process late, to help finish things up. And one of the things that really impressed me is the extent to which there is much more room to explore in both of the rules aspect, things like adding classes like the priest, but also in the setting. The cults need their own book. There definitely needs to be an advanced book on magic. All these things, and I think the success of the Kickstarter is going to make a lot of those possible.
True.
A big book of nothing but monsters. Since the ones that we did for the quick start rules were either specific to the setting or generally useful monsters that any doomsayer could run with and use to either run an adventure or create his own.
I think that's also the advantage of being able to create a game that's not a licensed game. Because what often happens if you have a licensed game, it's a property everyone knows, but oftentimes after a few books, the license runs out and there are no new source books to get, no new adventures to get, and it's done.
I've worked on a lot of licensed games, and some licenses really lend themselves to a long chain of product, and some licenses, one good core rule book with a setting section, and you've covered everything that you need to cover. Because settings that aren't designed for games don't always adapt well into games. Sometimes they do. And part of the fun of writing a licensed game is teasing out all these details of the setting that the creator either wasn't aware he was creating or tossed off as a detail that sounded interesting to him, but now the implications can be explored, things like that. It's a lot of fun.
I think so as well. But I think that the main difference here is that and it's just such a shame if you're investing in a licensed game, and there are a lot of amazing licensed games around, and you wrote many of them, Steve. But the advantage is that we can guarantee our backers and the people investing in the game that this is going to be a long chain of products, and we're not going to stop in a year or two. And the books aren't going to run out. We're going to do more supplements and more adventures, and there will be more coming.
That's the Kickstarter is actually providing, right? An opportunity, an actual kickstart of something, something new. Because, oftentimes, and this is not like to say this is bad or anything, because I like these games as much as anyone. But there's a lot of those games that are like super easily digestible, like 60 pages, 100 pages, and they're fun. But Blood and Doom really is about the more long-term, bigger, operatic. Like, I feel like the game has a lot of potential to be a go-to game. And that's what I wanted to create, is like, I wanted people not to say, oh, let's try out Blood and Doom for 2 weekends and then go back to our regular game. I'm hoping, and I'm hoping we're succeeding in it. I'm hoping that this is a game that could become people's go-to fantasy game, because it is so. It's set up to be large, and it's set up to be able to be expanded upon, and there's some regions in the world that we can still explore, some other secrets that we cannot even mention yet on this stream, that we could all do in the future. Bill, and also there's these little sci-fi elements sprinkled in, and I can see something happening in that direction as well in the future. Not immediately, because I think you should really let it breathe.
Yeah, you can't do everything at once. You have to carefully plan out what you want to focus on.
Yeah, and do that at the right time when players are feeling that they may want more. Then you can try and discover new areas and supplements, and especially adventures. I like adventures a lot. These digestible, I mean, Faces of Evil turned out to be 100 pages because we just can't help ourselves.
112.
There's a fine line.
Yeah.
Part of what you have to do as a game writer or a line developer is there's a fine line between providing the game master with things that make his life easier, and providing him with so much information that he might just as well create his own thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of.
So you have to be careful to both satisfy the desire for lore and useful material, and yet not flood people.
Yeah,
exactly.
I definitely agree with you and this sentiment. I kind of get this feeling sometimes when I look at the Forgotten Realms. And it's a cool setting, but when you look at the amount of books and writing that has already been done on this, when you're new, you kind of get the same feeling when you start reading comics or whatever, and they're already up to issue I don't know what number, and it's hard to find a point where you can enter into it and feel like you can master the subject matter and make it your own and do something with it. It's like, oh my god, there's so many. I don't feel comfortable like maybe running this, because there seems to be so much information that I just don't know about. And if you just have a few books that really do a good job of conveying to you what this world is about, and so that's it. Okay, cool. Now I can really, take this and run with it. And otherwise, you just feel lost all the time. So that's definitely also a balancing act, or like a line that you don't want to cross. I think to do too much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think it should be compartmentalized, right? You can do a book on like maybe an area of the world, but then just have that book be about that area, and not make it make it expected that that everyone knows about this when they run like the main game, or
if a doomsayer wants to set a campaign in Aether, somewhere in Aether, a specific country or continent or region.
Yeah,
he can buy the book for that region and learn about it without necessarily having to know in detail the rest of the world.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's important.
That's something that you have to prepare for in designing an actual game line, and it's not always something that's thought about, partly because of inexperience, and because planning strategies for publishing have to take a lot of things into account, and sometimes even if you want to do very specific books, you have to be more general because of pricing and scheduling and a million other things.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the things that we don't want to do. We don't want to do a multiverse and there's like 10 different versions of Altair. That's what
and different timelines, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what's happening in some comics, because some at a certain point you have like 10 different comics featuring
Yeah.
the same character, but it's different versions of the character.
Yeah.
And if you're jumping into those new stories, it's sometimes really hard as a new reader to
Yeah.
figure out which character belongs in which multiverse, or in which
Oh yeah,
universe, in which timeline.
getting into
And that's
any
definitely not something we're gonna do.
yeah.
So, for example, when I was writing about regions, sometimes it was hard to figure out, should I say 7 or 5, because we're detailing 5 regions in the guide to Altir.
Yeah.
But there are 7 regions.
7
And that's
known
because
regions at least. You know,
Yes.
maybe who
So
knows?
and
Yeah.
that's because we wanted to have the room to still develop a few
Sure.
regions, and that cannot be known by the people in the other 5 regions, because either they're so hostile, or they keep people at bay or out of their region.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a lot of them to develop along the way, but it still had to make sense. So to us, I think, or at least to Ferruccio as well, from the get-go, it wouldn't have made sense to do 5 different books on each region that's already known, because there's travel, there's people know about these different regions.
Yeah.
So in the Guide to Altir, we already have the 5 regions because people know about them.
Yeah.
They travel, and that's what happened in real life as well. People traveled a lot during the Middle Ages.
Sure. I have quite a few books on the subject,
Yeah.
in fact.
No, I
But the other 2,
If you
Kendall
want
and
to,
Taliot,
you can travel.
excellent. Let's do that. I definitely wanna look into some.
We'll do road trip to the Etherean jungles,
There you go.
something like that.
well, it's I think
go.
also what you say, Dirk, is correct, but also I think it's worth having some places on the map that are just not described yet, because otherwise
yeah, sure.
there needs to be some mystery left,
Absolutely.
and you
No,
can-
and some GMs like to create their own stuff, and they
Yeah.
need a place in the world to put that.
yeah.
Exactly.
And it's not even necessarily to make an expansion for those regions, but I think if you tell the reader everything that they could possibly want to know, then it loses a sense of mystique a little bit,
Yeah.
right? So
That's
Sure.
one
yeah.
reason in doing hero system books over the past 20 years, we always in when we do setting material, we have a player section that anyone can read, and then a GM, we call it the GM's vault,
yeah,
where I put information that's not covered in the player section, or corrections of information where it said it said this, but really,
oh, that's cool.
and provide
Yeah.
other useful information. And I freely admit I stole that concept straight from Deadlands. I learned it writing for Deadlands, but that way players can read the book and not come across any spoilers. And in fact, they might come across some information that is flat wrong.
Yeah.
And I find that to be a lot more fun, rather than just giving everybody everything all at once, because then the GM has to say, well, no, you can't read that book. And
Sure.
players might want to read that book. They want, if
Yeah.
my character comes from this city, I'd like to read the book about that city. If the GM says no, then I feel kind of let down.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And giving them this player side of the information can then be a good solution. I like the idea of then making contradictions on the Doomsayer side, to say like, oh, wait, actually, and players will be deceived and maybe go to some place because they think one thing, but then they'll discover another. Of course, adventures can play a big part in this as well, because the way I see it, that's also why I always say, don't stare blindly to just the settlements that you see on the world map, because it's a world map, right?
Yeah.
There's so many tiny little settlements in between those that can have entire campaigns or adventures based around them that don't even have a name in the setting book or on the map, because simply it's a world map, right? And that's what adventures are for, I feel. And that's why I think it's always fun to have a good, like a basis for the setting. But then when you create an adventure, you can easily set it in like one place of the setting, and then come up with an entirely new village or something going on there that's not described in the grander scheme of the setting book, but still you have that as a background, or you can use it as, you know, maybe there's some like cause and effect going on, or maybe there's some political intrigue, and then from that you derive these more intimate and smaller stories that are then so fun to have in these adventure books.
One of my favorite, perhaps my number one favorite of the early D&D adventures was the Village of Hamlet, that took this little out of the way village that nobody had ever heard of or thought anything about, and wove a story around it that eventually led into the Temple of Elemental Evil. And I really like that. I've tried to sort of recreate that several times in coming up with campaigns of my own, because I think it's a great way to sort of kick things off. And like you say, it lets you take an otherwise, you know, a dot on the map that the developers put there just to fill in blank space, and actually do something with it. And that's fun. And you don't have to define everything in your book. You can let GMs or doomsayers and players define it some too.
Exactly. And those adventures can contradict the main setting book, and do what you mentioned earlier, like saying, oh, see, maybe you thought it was this way, but you know, in this adventure actually we're discovering something else entirely. Maybe.
Everybody in the outside world says that the inhabitants of Bridgeford are insular and unkind to strangers. In fact, they're friendly and open.
Exactly. And also this interesting, Dirk, in the Guide to a Tier, a lot of the times you and I write about these secrets and rumors, and actually they all for the people watching, when you go and explore any region, there's a hex map, and there's these points of interest that can vary from like ruins to floating stones to ancient temples, crevices in the earth, and each of them has 2 or 3, I think mostly 3, secrets and rumors tied to them. And what's so cool about this is that they all contradict each other and are different. And who's to say what's true, right, Stephen? So,
I did some of that with the monsters, putting in their background lore, suggesting people think this, but some scholars think this other thing.
Exactly.
Or people think this, and they're completely wrong.
Yeah, and that's going to be a lot of fun for the doomsayer to then be like, oh, I like this secret or rumor much better than the other two. So this will be my reality, and this is what I will present to the players, and maybe I'll use the other two to kind of use as a red herring or something.
Yeah. Also, there's always something that's even more threatening, even more dangerous in each of those occasions, and that's always also something that is going on in the background and people are not aware of.
Yeah, in the cities though, in the cities mostly.
In the cities, in the cities, exactly. So, and that's a little bit of that as well. That's something the Doomsayer knows that can build up to a larger campaign or to a very important adventure. And the same holds true for the cults, because, as we said earlier, all of the cults think that something else is going to happen than the horrible, terrifying thing that's actually going to happen if they succeed.
Yeah.
So that's already baked into the entire setting in different ways, in different locations in the cities, and also in the cults themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's always a lot of fun for the Doomsayer to kind of toy around with.
Well, gentlemen, much like Jason, it's time for me to bow out.
Yes, I think I agree with you. I think we covered all that we wanted to talk about, and as a matter of fact, I'll be doing another stream tomorrow.
You're going to be running a game, right?
No, that's Saturday, and I'm not sure if, because as people watching will probably have noticed, for me, I'm new to streaming, but I have to give the people what they want, and everybody was asking for a stream. So I will record it on Saturday, but then I will edit out like technical issues and that sort of thing, and then upload it Sunday. So I hope Sunday people will be able to watch me run a game for others. But tomorrow also, and I think that will be live, I'll be doing a rules overview and explain people, just like for people who don't want to read the primer book but who just want to sit back and listen to my beautiful voice. Tell them, you know, how does it work with the dice pool, etc., etc. So I see some comments coming in. I read the mechanics. Looking for it. Oh yes, definitely do so. There should be enough there for you to try out the game. And also check out Faces of Evil. It's a ready-to-play adventure. It's also on DriveThruRPG. Faces of Evil, and that's the one that I'm gonna run as well this weekend and stream. So thank you, Stephen, for coming
you're welcome.
on.
I'll be glad to come back again if you want to do this next week.
I would love to do it, and I think if we do this more frequently, we will see, you know, some more viewers popping in, and they'll know what to expect a bit, and it's going to be a ton of fun. Dirk, also to you, thank you so much for being here. It's funny, I can say goodbye to Dirk, but what the people don't know who are watching is I talk to him 10 times a day, so I'll speak to him. We're working on stuff and writing adventures, so we'll speak soon.
I actually created a random table that I use with my girlfriend. Whenever you
I call,
we have a little bit of time, we roll the dice and see which one.
Oh, that's so cool!
What phrases?
What could it be? You know, it's like
you usually start with Dirk and then take it from there.
Cool.
And then there's a lot of things, but I think we should publish that soon enough.
Yeah.
Because it's
or at least put it on the website as a free giveaway.
Yes,
it would be very cool.
Anyhow, good night, gentlemen.
Yeah,
I'll talk to you again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Okay.